Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most intense, deeply human rivalries in all of history. We've got a dying teenage king on one side and a legendary rising sultan on the other. It's a clash that literally determined the fate of the Holy Land. We're talking unbelievable willpower, crushing betrayals, and the kind of tactical genius that reshaped the entire medieval world. So, let's get into it.
To set the scene, just think about the incredible contrast between these two leaders. In one corner, there's Baldwin IV. He takes the throne of Jerusalem at barely 13 years old, he's dealing with a devastating diagnosis of leprosy, and he has to somehow hold together a totally fractured kingdom of European nobles. And facing off against him, Saladin, a brilliant, patient veteran statesman from a Kurdish family who's successfully unifying the Islamic heartland and setting himself up as the ultimate champion against the Crusader states.
Now, to really understand Baldwin, you have to grasp the heavy physical and psychological toll he was dealing with. Leprosy wasn't just an illness back then. It was intensely stigmatized, often seen as a literal divine punishment. His tutor, the historian William of Tyre, first realized something was seriously wrong when the kid didn't feel any pain in his right arm while playing with his friends. That lack of sensation was the early warning sign of a disease that would eventually take his sight and his ability to walk. It was essentially a death sentence. But instead of hiding away, Baldwin actually stepped up to lead.
On the flip side, Saladin is over here playing the long game with just breathtaking patience. By 1169, he suddenly becomes the vizier of Egypt. Then, in just a few short years, he totally rewires the power dynamics of the Middle East, aligning Egypt with his allies in Baghdad. By 1174, he takes Damascus peacefully, freeing himself as the one restoring order and piety. So he goes from being a general in Egypt to running this massive unified Islamic empire. He was building an absolute juggernaut.
Which brings us to a showdown that honestly sounds impossible. In 1177, Saladin marches this huge army toward Jerusalem, completely underestimating the sickly young king. His forces were so big he actually let them scatter and pillage, figuring the Crusaders were no threat. But Baldwin? He moved with shocking speed and intercepted Saladin at a hill called Montgisard. And he did it with a shockingly tiny force, just 375 knights and a few thousand infantry, going up against Saladin's absolute war machine.
Right before the battle, there's this moment that's just incredibly cinematic. The teenage king, whose body is already ravaged by leprosy, gets helped off his horse. He drops to his knees in the mud, right in front of the relic of the true cross, which was believed to be the actual wood from the cross of Jesus. He prays for victory, and when he stands back up, his wildly outnumbered men are just so fired up and inspired that they prepare for a totally desperate all-or-nothing cavalry charge.
And that clash at Montgisard was a complete shock to everyone. Baldwin's knights hit Saladin's hastily formed lines with a massive, heavy-armored cavalry charge right up the middle. Total devastation. Saladin's troops got pushed into swampy terrain and completely lost formation. It got so bad that Saladin himself literally had to jump on a racing camel just to escape back to Egypt, losing almost his entire army in the process. Baldwin, the kid they thought was sidelined by disease, comes back to Jerusalem an absolute living legend.
But look, Saladin was a massive pragmatist. Getting humiliated at Montgisard was a harsh lesson, but he learned from it. He totally shifted his strategy. No more of these risky, deep pushes right into Crusader territory. Instead, he switched to calculated raids. It became all about long-term erosion, chipping away at the Crusader kingdom's resources, testing their defenses, and just waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike.
And we see this new strategy work flawlessly at Jacob's Ford in 1179. The Crusaders decided to build this bold, really provocative new fortress way too close to Saladin's base in Damascus. Saladin actually tried to pay Baldwin to stop building it, but Baldwin stubbornly refused, so Saladin drops the hammer. He launches a swift, brutal siege, collapses the brand new walls, and his forces just pour in. They took absolutely no prisoners among the Templar Knights. It was a massive shift, putting the psychological and military advantage right back in the Muslims' hands.
Okay, jump forward to 1182. Baldwin's physical condition has deteriorated to the point where he's practically blind and entirely immobile, but his willpower? Totally unbroken. When Saladin launches another attack, Baldwin refuses to stay behind. He actually has himself carried into the Battle of Les Fourbalais on a litter, giving orders to his generals from his stretcher. Just seeing their agonizingly sick king out there on the battlefield completely galvanized the Christian troops, and they managed to fight Saladin to a strategic stalemate. Just incredible dedication.
But as the king became completely incapacitated, the biggest threat wasn't actually Saladin anymore. It was coming from the inside. The kingdom of Jerusalem basically started tearing itself apart. On one side, you have Baldwin's sister Sibylla and her new husband Guy de Lusignan, who a lot of people saw as super arrogant and inexperienced. On the other side, you have the pragmatic, veteran nobles like Raymond of Tripoli and Balian of Ibelin, who absolutely did not trust Guy. Add in the Templars and Hospitallers, and the whole kingdom's unity was just collapsing.
It all hits a breaking point in 1185, when Baldwin finally dies at just 24 years old. This kicks off a nightmare succession crisis. The crown goes to his 8-year-old nephew, Baldwin V, but then the poor kid dies suddenly the very next year. With his massive power vacuum, Sibylla steps up and controversially crowns her husband, Guy, as the new king of Jerusalem. This was exactly the worst-case scenario the veteran nobles had been dreaded.
And yeah, Guy's leadership was an absolute disaster. Where Baldwin built consensus, Guy ruled through paranoia and just forcing his way. He instantly alienated seasoned guys like Raymond of Tripoli, who was actually so furious he signed a temporary truce with Saladin. Guy basically left the entire kingdom of Jerusalem fractured and totally exposed, right when Saladin was gathering this massive, unified army to crush them for good.
So let's look at July 1187. Saladin pulls off an absolute masterclass in warfare at the Horns of Hattin. He sets this brilliant, ruthless trap. He baits King Guy by besieging Tiberias, and against the desperate advice of his veterans, the hot-headed King Guy takes the bait. He marches the entire Crusader field army out into the scorching, waterless desert. Saladin's troops block all the water wells, constantly harass them with light cavalry, and then they light the dry brush on fire. The wind blows all that blinding, choking smoke straight into the Crusader camp.
It was a waking nightmare. By the morning of July 4th, the Crusaders are trapped, severely dehydrated, and choking on smoke, completely surrounded by Saladin's fresh forces. The Christian field army wasn't just beaten, they were totally annihilated. Guys were dropping from heat exhaustion and thirst before the arrows even hit them. In a single day, nearly a century of Crusader military power was just completely wiped out. The sheer scale of this loss was unprecedented. King Guy himself is captured. The True Cross relic, the ultimate spiritual symbol of the kingdom, gets seized and paraded away. And Saladin, who saw the Templars and Hospitallers as these fanatical, unbreakable enemies, ordered hundreds of their knights executed. In one afternoon, the core military backbone of Jerusalem was gone, leaving the whole region basically defenseless.
So, with the main army gone, Saladin just steamrolls through the region, picking off vulnerable cities one by one. But the real prize was Jerusalem itself. Inside the city walls, it was total panic. It fell to Balian of Ibelin, who barely made it out of Hattin alive, to set up some kind of defense. Talk about desperate. He's hastily knighting everyday civilians, literally teenage boys, and getting women to carry boiling oil up to the walls just to hold off Saladin's massive siege engines.
Balian knows they can't hold out forever, and he wants to avoid a complete bloodbath, so he rides out to negotiate. He basically threatens to destroy all the holy sites if Saladin doesn't give them a way out. And Saladin shows incredible clemency and pragmatism here. He agrees to let the city surrender peacefully, allowing the Christians to literally buy their freedom for just 10 dinars a person. And amazingly, Saladin and his generals actually dipped into their own pockets to help pay that ransom for thousands of the poorest citizens who couldn't afford it. So on October 2nd, 1187, the gates of Jerusalem swing open peacefully. Saladin's banners go up over the walls, and there's no massacre. It's a huge intentional contrast to when the Crusaders violently took the city back in 1099. The Christian population is allowed to leave safely, and Saladin cements his legacy not just as a brilliant conqueror, but as a genuinely chivalrous, pious, and just ruler. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? We're left with two seriously enduring models of leadership. You've got Baldwin IV, a guy who fought through agonizing physical decay to protect his people with absolute clarity of purpose. And you've got Saladin, who used amazing discipline and unity to forge an empire, but never let absolute power corrupt his moral compass. It's a legendary rivalry, but one that was built on a foundation of real mutual respect. Of course, the fall of Jerusalem sent absolute shockwaves across Europe, which instantly triggered the mobilization of the Third Crusade. The board was reset, and the whole bloody cycle was about to start up again. So as the dust settles here, we're left with this massive provocative question. Would the Holy Land ever truly know peace, or is it cursed to bleed until the end of time? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.